The reason why you're here tonight is hear some incredible stories of incredible people from the greatest generation of World War II. And with more to introduce them to us, please welcome our Illinois State oral historian, Dr. Mark DePue.
Thank you, Joe. Joe was quite an addition to our team here, don't you think? Yeah. Now I've got to do a little bit of house cleaning here because this is not the presentation I need. It's this one right here. And while I'm getting that queued up, let me just make a couple comments. How many have, this is the time to be honest here, how many have not been to the World War II exhibit? Oh my gosh. You need to go see the World War II exhibit, you really do. And you just talk to the neighbor who's been there and they'll tell you. It includes some great posters, lots of information on the reader rail panels. It also includes 21 videos of a lot of the people that we've interviewed over the last 10, 12 years with equally amazing stories as the ones that we're going to hear tonight. In fact, Betty is one of those stories that we have, so you get to hear her story as well. How many World War II veterans do I have here? And did I see Andy Anderson here? Are you here, Andy? That's what I thought. I just finished an interview with Andy, who could have been up here had I done it about 3 or 4 years ago. But the interview I had with him was because he was in the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, and one of those people who landed in the 2nd wave on Omaha Beach and then fought his way across Europe. So, another amazing story. I do want to give some recognition before I start here to a couple other people who helped put all those videos together for our World War II exhibit, and they're probably in the back there. Garrett, if you can hold your hand up someplace, and Kurt Williams. Garrett did all the sound for those videos, and Kurt did all the videos. He did the video portion of it, had to put up with me saying, no, that picture won't work. Let's use this video also. And it was a great experience for me, and I think he even had fun doing it as well. So they need to get the recognition they're due for doing those kinds of things for us, and it's what makes this institution so special. But anyway, let's get to our special guest for this evening. On the left here, we've got Frank Moscardelli. Next to him is Jerry Raschke. And the lovely young lady on the end is Betty Wrigley. So a little bit about each one of those to give you a better sense of who they are. Frank Moscardelli, born in Springfield, Illinois, October of 1925. Went to school here, did not finish high school. He dropped out at the age of 17, I believe, so you could get into the war effort. And then for whatever reason, might be one of the stories somebody can ask you, the Marines, you didn't end up in the Marines, you ended up in the Army instead. 89th Division, 353rd Infantry Regiment of the 89th Division. That unit got to Germany in January of 1945. So it's kind of towards the end, but he certainly saw plenty of action for the last several months of the war. And he was your standard infantryman. The folks that did the real fighting. So that's Frank's story. And for each one of these, I have a little excerpt that I wanted to play for. And this is the story. In fact, what you can't see unless you really crane your neck and hurt your neck in the process is a picture of what it was like in the DUK, the DUWK, that motorized vehicle that could both float and drive, crossing the Rhine River. And here's your story about doing that, Frank.
We got in the boats, in this boat, and there's a bunch of small assault boats to the side, sitting there, and there was 3 guys there were several of them getting in these boats to row across. It looked like a like a fishing boat, a flat boat, and there was 3 of them getting in each one, and we had packs, of course, on, and I seen that as I was getting in there, I seen one of them turning over, you know, in the water, and then the lieutenant told us all to get down as low as we could get down, and he's standing up there making us get down, you know, so we were down in there, and then as we started across here I hear these 88s coming in, and where they were coming from, I don't know, but they were coming in. And it didn't hit either duck. Nobody got hit. And we got across, and when we got across, we got out of the duck and started up the hill. And it looked like a big winery, or grape harbor, way across the bank there. But it was a pretty steep hill. And I seen one fellow laying there, American GI, and it didn't take time out because we were really moving. And trying to get up out of the way from where the ducks were, and that didn't take long because we hustled up there, and that's why I seen this one fellow laying there, and I thought, after I began to think about these things, I thought it was one of the guys that was on the patrol that put the machine guns out, because there was no machine gun fire on us when we was getting in them ducks.
Okay, there's a couple other pictures. There he is behind a M1 rifle, and Frank is the one without the shirt on in that group picture. See, I knew they'd like that picture, Frank. Jerry Raschke. Jerry Raschke was born in Omaha, Nebraska in August of 1924. So all of you are doing your math to figure out how mature these people are on the stage here this evening. There he is on the left, and with some crew members on the right. Jerry joined the Air Force, the United States Army Air Force at that time, and ended up in the 320th Bomb Group, assigned as a tail gunner on a B-26. And we'll talk a little bit more about what a B-26 was when we have a chance for some questions. He saw quite a bit of action at Sardinia, and then Corsica, and then into France. Those were the places that his unit was based out of. Nobody on his aircraft ever got injured, but they did crash land 3 times, or forced landings 3 times, and he ended up flying 61 missions. So saw a lot of action.
We were over target, and I don't know what happened. We had to salvo our bombs, but it didn't work. One of them got caught up in the open bomb bay. Well, the bombardier's position is in the nose as expected, but in order to get out of the nose, the co-pilot has to back up his chair and the bombardier crawl between them. Well, they couldn't do that because the crew was having a time controlling the ship. So as I'm the armament man, it was my job to go back to see what was wrong. By the way, just before when there was bombs away, I heard an "oh-oh" over the intercom, and I knew something was wrong, and it was. And so I went back to the bomb bay, and one side of the bombs was held up by one of the bombs against the catwalk and against the bomb bay door. And I had to, there's a propeller-like thing that takes the, fuses the bomb. And if that comes out, then the bomb is armed. Well, I had to, it was going around, so I had to push in the propeller so it wouldn't go around any longer. And then I got one foot on the bomb bay door and one foot on the catwalk and tried to get that one bomb loose so it'll come out. And fortunately, it wasn't hung up too bad, and I was able to do it. And I got that one out, and the rest of them came out. The rest of them were armed, and I don't know what they hit, and I wasn't about to look because I was trying to get back out of the bomb bays, and the bomb bays closed. So the bomb bays were open for so long that they were running out of fuel, and he couldn't get back to Sardinia. And so we landed in a fighter base, a vacated fighter base north of Rome.
Imagine yourself being the guy who has to kick that bomb free. Not the job I would want to have. And the last person on our panel, Betty Wrigley. And I don't know if that looks familiar to her or not, Betty, if that's Bremerton, Washington, the Puget Sound shipyard. Betty's story, she was born in Collinsville, Illinois, and she was born on June 29th, 1927. And there she is, in her dungarees on the left, and there's a candid photo that was taken while you were out there, I believe, Betty. It's my favorite picture of you by far. And let's hear a little bit about Betty's story. While she was we consider her the Rosie the Riveter, even though she doesn't.
I caught hot rivets. I didn't actually use a rivet gun, ever. But I worked with a riveter, and number one, those rivet guns were this long. They were like a jackhammer. And I would have a funnel, maybe this big, around, and kind of a graduated tube. And I'd have long gloves up to here. And of course, I often wore goggles too at that point because carbon would fly off of the big rivets. Anyway, somebody'd be down there about on the next deck, and they'd have this big machine that, it must have been electric, because they would heat these up until they were red hot, and the carbon would be flying off, and they'd take it and sling it up there, and I'd have to catch it. And I never missed one. But anyway, I would take a tongs then and put it in the bulkhead, in the hole. And my rivet guy that I was working with would rivet the rivet into the hole, but there'd be somebody on the back side that I wouldn't see. That was the bucker. He would hold against it to flatten it out on the back side. You know what they were doing at that time was reinforcing the deck steel, putting another layer of steel. That's why the California was in dry dock for so long. They were putting more steel layers on the deck and more steel layers on the bulkheads. And that's why I can't hear. So anyway.
That's a better excuse than most of us have, I think. The other thing I should have mentioned is that the Puget Sound shipyard was repairing warships that had been damaged someplace. So several of the battleships that were sunk at Pearl Harbor were raised enough so they can get them to the shipyard, and those were some of the ships that your crew was working on while you're out there. Okay, so there's our three veterans, and I get the honor to start by asking some questions, and then we'll turn it over to the audience. We wanted to give the audience plenty of time to do this as well. And in true military fashion, I'm going to continue by working alphabetically. So Frank, you're up first with the questions. And the first question I have for you, you got to Europe rather late. Battle of the Bulge was just finishing up when you got there. Was there still much of a fight left for the Germans that you were facing?
Well, the ones we came in contact with, there was fighting, of course, because we had a long ways to go from there, from Luxembourg to Emaus, Czechoslovakia.
Where did your unit end up at the end of the war?
Czechoslovakia. Not the end of the war, but where the war was ending, because I got a pass to go to Paris for a few days, and we had to hold up so the Russians could take Berlin.
Have your kids heard any stories about your time in Paris?
Well, no, I don't think so.
Well, one of the other questions, I mentioned that you had dropped out of high school.
Yes.
Would it be fair to say that your high school career wasn't exactly stellar?
Well, I didn't finish.
So here's the question for you, Frank. You ended up coming back from the war started a moving business that was very successful, Pleasant Nursery that was very successful. I'm wondering if your experiences in war helped you for the rest of your life.
Oh, I think so. I have three people to give that credit to, and that's Christ and my mother and father. And that's one of the biggest things.
And so you don't get into too much trouble. You got married shortly after you got back, right?
Oh, yeah. Then I learned more.
Okay, Jerry, it's your turn. What I wanted to ask you, B-26 Marauder. Now, most people, they're familiar with the bombers of the war. They're thinking about the B-17s, maybe the B-24s. They don't know much about the B-26. So tell us about the B-26.
The B-26 was called the Flying Coffin. It was called the Flying Prostitute because there was no visible means of support. In other words, it had very short wings. The B-26 was a very difficult and a very dangerous ship to fly and fly in. One of the things that we said, and this is the truth, is that if you had a bad pilot, you were dead. And that was true. We killed, in a 30-day period, we killed 31 people because the pilots were not good enough. They had to, the B-17, for example, would take off at 70 to 90 miles an hour. The B-26 had to take off at a minimum of 150 miles an hour, and in order to land, had to fly into the ground at 150 miles an hour. It was a very difficult ship. If you didn't have a good pilot, you were dead.
Well, the B-25 was the other twin-engine bomber. In your opinion, which was the better bomber?
Well, naturally, the 26, but the B-25 was an easier ship to fly. It had longer wings, and it was not as a difficult ship to fly. But the B-25 did a great job during the war.
And for those of us who remember that famous raid on Tokyo, it was B-25s flying off an aircraft carrier that did that job, right?
Yeah, 26 could never do that. It was 26 tried to take off of a carrier, it'd end up in the ocean.
But you're still convinced that the B-26 was the better bomber?
Yeah, in wartime.
Well, that's what counts. The other question I wanted to ask you is 61 missions. And for those who are a little bit into the military history, you always heard that the B-17s and the 24s, you fly 25 missions, later in the war, 30 missions, and that's it. You get to rotate to a different job or back to the States. How did you end up flying so many missions?
Well, first, two things. One, the B-26 didn't fly as long distance as the 17s. And by the same token, weren't over in enemy territory, or as long as the 17. And that's the primary reason. And since we got back in time, instead of 10 or 12-hour flights, we had 5 and 6-hour flights. So the powers that be said that we should have more missions. When I first got there, it was 50 missions, and then it was 60 missions, and that's the way it was.
You pretty much got close to the end of the war, did you not?
Yes, I was on my way home on VE Day.
I think you were in England at the time, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Betty, tell us about how you ended up in Bremerton, Washington.
That's a convoluted story.
Well, that's why we want to hear it.
Okay. Well, I was born in Collinsville, but I grew up in the near south part of St. Louis called Soulard. I don't know if anyone heard of Soulard, but that's where I grew up. And then I also did not finish high school. And because of strange family things that happened, we were also members of the Depression. I don't know whether these men were, but I was. Family members were shuttled off to their relatives for the summer, just so they get fed. They didn't have another mouth to feed. So we lost some of our family members. And somewhere along the line, I met an adult cousin and his wife, and they were getting ready to go to Bremerton, Washington to get a job in the shipyards. And they asked my mother, would it be all right if Betty would come with me and Eleanor and stay with us until after the war's over? And I thought, my mother said yes. And I thought, wow. You know, but it takes another mouth away from there that she doesn't have to feed. I'm sure that's not her reason, but anyway. So I did go to Bremerton, Washington with my older cousin and his wife, and we got jobs immediately at the shipyard. He was hired as a welder. I was hired as a shipfitter's helper. No one asked me if I had an ID or a birth certificate. He needed one for his job. I didn't need one for some reason. I was only 15. 2 months later, I got to be 16. That's how I got there.
Well, I thought there was a point in this process where you had to kind of fudge on your age a little bit.
Well, I did. I told him I was 17 instead of 15.
You weren't the only ones. I've talked to plenty of young men who were doing the same things.
I'm sure.
So what exactly did you do in the shipyards?
Well, when I first began, I worked in the shipfitter building, which it looked a little bit like some of the space buildings now, very tall and a big warehouse type thing. And when I first started, I was cutting aluminum rivets. I don't even know what they used the aluminum rivets for, but they had this big machine, and it had various size holes, and I would have stick a rivet one at a time to a designated length. That's all I did. It was very boring. So anyway, I cut rivets, and then
that was before you went and actually worked on the ships themselves?
Oh, they didn't send me out there right away. It took me 2 weeks or so.
It didn't take you long. The part about your story that fascinates me is you'd have these ships come in, the major battleships, the aircraft carriers that needed to be refurbished completely, in some cases practically built from the ground up, I would think. And then at the end of the process, before the sailors headed out to sea, they would have a dance, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Tell us about those dances.
Oh, my. Well, all of the unmarried ladies would get an invitation when a ship was finished. The admiral, or the captain, rather, of the ship, would send out these little invitations inviting us to the Craven Center, which was the military entertainment center, and they would have a specific date, and all of us could go. Of course, when we got dressed to go to the dance, even on the 2 occasions when they had formal dances, we would have to get on the bus and ride the bus downtown in our formals. Didn't matter. We didn't have gas. We walked most places. But anyway, we would get invited to these dances, and we would sometimes have a card. Sometimes we have a picture of the ship on the invitation. I saved a bunch of them. It was fun.
I can't imagine there was too much time that you were sitting next to the wall someplace. You were on the dance floor, I bet.
You bet.
Okay, very good. Well, the way we designed this tonight is just kind of give you a little bit of a hint in who these people are and the amazing stories they have, because I wanted to make sure we had plenty of time for the audience to ask questions. So I've been told that it's going to be really tough to hand out mics, so you're going to raise your hand and I'll hear the question and repeat the question so the audience can hear. And when I don't repeat it, somebody yell out, "Repeat the question." And you're anxious, you're eager to ask a question here.
Raschke, on your tail.
Okay, as a tail gunner, did you ever encounter any ME-109s or Focke-Wulf 190s for that matter?
Well, it was a 109, and it came in on the tail, but it just so happened I had switched with the tail because his turret guns went out, and I was up in the turret to take care of those. So he took my place, and it was his first mission. And he froze at the guns when the ME-109 came in on us. And so the tail guns didn't shoot. The waist guns couldn't get a beat on him because he was not in their sights. So he came up at what I would call 9 o'clock, and he was just sitting there. So there was no skill on my part whatsoever. He was just right out at 9 o'clock. I'd say less than 50 yards from me. So I shot him and got him, and that was it. No skill.
Did you encounter lots of fighters, or were you more concerned about flak?
Well, we were absolutely flak. The B-26 was a very, very fast aircraft. And actually, its speed was about the same as a fighter aircraft. So a fighter aircraft, and by the way, the Germans were just darn good. They were tenacious, and they were brave, and they were very good. But if they came in, they usually come in at us out of the sun. And for example, this time that we were hit, they came out of the sun and got 3 of our bombers right firsthand. And then they would go around to the tail. It would take them a while to get back to us because we were flying about the same speed they were. But they would catch up with us. And toward the end of the war, I think many of you heard the Liberators and the big bombers hit the Palesti air fuel dumps in Romania. Had they not done that, the war would have gone on a lot longer. But the heavies took care of the oil, and the Germans were running out of the gas at the end of the war. And in order to get the fighters up, they would haul the fighters to the end of the runway, and they would take off. And usually they would, for us, they would only had enough gas to do one pass. With the heavies being slower, they could take more. They could have a dogfight. But with us, they could only get one pass. And so does that take care of that question?
Absolutely. The question was if you saw any of the Me-262 German jets, which they fielded towards the end of the war.
Unfortunately, yes. They were, if the Germans would have had enough fuel for them, we would have lost the war, period. They were that good. The first time they hit us, they came out of the sun again and got 3 of us right off the bat. But they didn't have enough fuel to do more than one pass at us. I don't know about the heavies. I never heard about them. But they were very difficult. And I was combat instructor, and so we had to come up with a new defense for the German fighters. They were that good.
Okay, Frank, this is your question. The question is, you're in the 89th Infantry Division. Mm-hmm. Once you got to the fight, were you walking most of the times, or were you moved around by trucks or any other means?
No walking. Don't know, all the time, never know. They never had the big picture, in other words. We run into scrimmages and such as that snapping and went on all the way, until it got easier because we started, taking over more or less of it.
Well, you're not just walking, are you? How much weight were you carrying?
I carried an M1. I was qualified with a BAR, but I never used it. I used the M1. And no riding, no hitchhiking. It was all walking and crawling.
Did you have a gas mask on you as well?
No, I had one set of combat boots when I went over. And you're supposed to have 2. And I lived in them combat boots for almost a year and a half overseas. So I did a lot of walking. But I'd wash them off, polish them up when we got break, we got back, and then we could move up to the front lines or change positions, but all walking.
you were there January, February, March. It's cold, it's wet. A lot of the soldiers, their biggest problem was trench foot. Did you have any problems with trench foot?
No, the only problem I had was blisters on my from my combat boots. I had one pair of combat boots when I left Boston. They said they were going to ship them to me, and I never got them. So I had one pair of boots for a year and a half. I polished them and washed them, mud, and I've gotten fights over them because of certain things that happen. There's a lot of things happen. But walking and getting sniped and being out on a point, that's a big thing. And I've been on a point. That was my biggest thing I've had, and get pinned down like a fish in a barrel. So, and like I said, I've been blessed. That's not luck. That's blessing that you get. Because ever since I've been in the service, I come home, things changed for better. Or I want to do this, it didn't happen. I got something better. And Almighty God is, and I'm not a real religious person, but there's somebody taking care of all of us, and we got to the best we can. So, does that answer your question about the walking and crawling and that?
Trucks, what's a truck? Right over here. The question, is, if I understand it correctly, is training to do things in a physical way is one thing, but how did you deal with the mental side? And actually, you're in combat especially, for all of you. How would you deal with the circumstances you're in and just focusing on that? Now, Frank, I'll start with you.
Well, when you're pinned down and when you're fired on and you move in and they got a draw on you, there ain't much you can do but open backfire or look where you are or protect yourself. And that's one way. But I never got into any hand-to-hand combat fighting. And I was trained for that in Camp Fannin, West Texas, in a basic training camp. But I never got that close to stabbing somebody or anything. All my things was with a rifle. So what I've done with the rifle, and that thing helped make you get down on the ground and be covered real quick. And return fire, of course. So,
Jerry, in your case, you're in a B-26. There isn't a whole lot of places you can hide when you're up there.
No, there's no place.
So how do you deal with the fear factor in that circumstance?
Well, I was just an 18-year-old punk kid, and I loved to fly, so actually it was quite exciting. I was still 18 when my pilot was killed. He was killed on my 5th mission with a full crew aboard, and I wasn't with him. And I made up my mind at that time, and I've mentioned it to my daughters, that from that point on, I never, ever worried about myself again. It's just the way it was. I was scared, yes, on some missions. In fact, on one mission, the flak was coming in on us and had a bead on us, and the bombardier said, "Bombs away," and I said, "Let's get the hell out of here," because that shot was getting closer to us. And the pilot wheeled it over, and we dove at about 400 miles an hour. And just as he started, we had a big blast, and we had 100 holes in our ship, and my left wing ship was shot down with a full crew aboard. So, but no, we were just too busy.
And Betty, a little bit different circumstance for you, but you had to feel something for these, you're working on these ships and know these young men are going back out in harm's way. How did you deal with that?
Well, I had a chance to meet quite a few young men who then, after I met them and danced with them, and some of them left to go to war, and I corresponded excuse me, with one sailor for a few times, And we wrote letters back and forth. And he was on a destroyer. And he was on one of 3 destroyers that were lost in the typhoon off of Philippines. His ship had 5 survivors out of 150 something. He was not one of them. So sometimes we got kind of blue and sad and whatever. But I didn't have anything to be feared of, be afraid of. So these men had more to worry about than I did.
But I imagine that it grows you up pretty quick in those kind of experiences.
Yeah, it does. It does.
In the back there. Apparently, you were on the front page of the newspaper on June the 7th. Do you know about this? Is this the recent?
Right after the 75th anniversary of D-Day.
Oh, that was when I was talking to the French. Okay. Should I go in with that?
Go ahead, yeah.
The French made me a knight in their Legion of Honor, and the French. I'm trying to think.
Consul General?
Yeah, French Consul General was in, and we were talking, and I'll say something about the French lost a whole generation of men during World War II. They were shot up pretty bad, and they were in the war for a long time, and so they lost a generation of men.
Are you talking about World War I?
World War II, and so they had to send in some young men to train, and there were some of them were being trained for the B-26, and some of our pilots trained their pilots, and since I was a combat instructor, the gunners were sent to me, and I trained a bunch of these young gunners. All they wanted to do was kill la Boche, and I trained the young kids to be gunners on bombers.
Right here. The question is, there is one of the things in the exhibit is the logbook of the ships that Betty, you worked on, and why were you keeping such meticulous records of everything?
I have no idea. Mainly what I was doing was trying to learn. Most ships have a letter, like battleships or BBs. And later in my job, I was sent to work on the battleship, the California, which was damaged at Pearl Harbor. It did not go this way. It just went scuttled straight down. But it took a bomb down the magazine, and then, did a lot of interior damage. So that ship I worked on it for 11 months. I don't know, it was already there when I got there, and I still worked on it for 11 months. And where was I going with this?
Well, you remember any of the other ships that you worked on?
Oh, of course. Anyway, I started writing down BB. Every battleship is a BB with a number after it. So I wrote those down when they came in. I did not work on all of those. But then I found out an aircraft carrier was a CV or a CVE. The smaller ships had an extra letter after them, not just a CV. And destroyers were DD. And we only build one. We also built some new ships in this shipyard, and they were destroyer escorts. I never worked on those new ones. They were smaller than a destroyer, so I'm not sure what their mission would be. But I worked on a lot of the different battleships and aircraft carriers and cruisers.
Did that answer your question? Got some more here.
Just a comment. I've looked at that book, I've just been very impressed by that book.
Well, thank you. I must have been a smart kid.
Okay. The question is about the kind of food you got. And I bet the kind of food that you got, Frank, is different than the kind of food that you got, Jerry. So, Jerry, I'll start with you on this one.
Well, it wasn't much different. We had Army food, and it wasn't much different. It was slop.
Frank, but you're on the cutting edge. You're out there walking.
Sea rations, Spam, and sometimes not much to eat.
Yeah, mostly Spam.
We had to look for food in small towns and stuff like that. So, you know, there was nobody out. There were no grocery stores on the way. So,
At least none that were open for Americans, huh?
no. You got a hot meal, went back when they changed, moved you back, you know, pull up another company, but you stay again, a hot meal back there, and then
Sometimes I like to ask people like you, what was your favorite sea ration?
would you want me to say Spam? Yeah.
Do you like Spam now?
Oh, I guess I could eat it if I had to.
Okay, Betty, in your case, I think the question is, tell us about where were you living and what kind of arrangements did you have when you got back home to rest a little bit?
Well, I lived in special housing that was built just for war workers. There was sort of like a suburb of Bremerton, a place called Manette. You had to cross a bridge in a small body of water to get to Manette. And this was a gradual hillside, but there were fourplexes, like stair steps, all the way up this hill. I have no idea how many there were, but when we got there to Bremerton, there was still dirt around the houses. They were these, nothing was planted with grass. We had a coal bin in the back door because it didn't get real cold. It's like Seattle. You're about 1 hour from Seattle by ferry. And we had to walk to the post office, which was all the way down at the bottom of the hill. But we did have bus stops, and that's how we got to work, was on the bus.
How much did you get paid?
I don't even remember. I had a pay stub in there, but I don't remember what it said.
Okay. What was impressive, I can't remember what the pay stub said, but what impressed me was even though you're not making a whole lot of money, you still pay quite a bit of taxes.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I did.
Okay, another question here. Okay, the question is if you had, for the two of you gentlemen, any interaction with other allies, French, Soviets, Dutch, English. I'll start with you because I think you might have at least seen some Soviets.
I did seen several Soviets at one time, and then it was all gone.
Did you actually meet them?
No, I didn't.
What do you think about the Germans that you spent some time on occupation duty? What's your impression of the Germans after the war?
I think they were, well, there was a lot of good people over there, a lot of good Germans. And I was stationed in Le Havre, and then I was stationed in Rouen, and then Linz, Austria. My mother was born in Tyrol, Austria. So I worked in a PW camp there, and we checking out with prisoners for details in that whole area. But they were good people, a lot of good people there. You couldn't fraternize with them, too much till the war really got over with.
Well, that was Eisenhower's dictate that there would be no fraternization with the Germans.
That's right.
Did that work?
Not all of it.
Okay, how about you, Jerry?
Was he talking about Allied troops or something like that?
Allied troops, I think, was generally what the question was, but civilians as well.
The only thing I can remember along that line is that when we were our base was in Corsica. I don't know how many of you remember the Chetniks or the Yugoslavs that fought the Germans in Yugoslavia. They were really mean guys, and we would see them walking the streets of Corsica. They were big guys and they were mean guys. And when we saw them walking toward us, we went on the opposite side of the street. We didn't fool with them.
Now
They had long knives.
you started in Sardinia, which was Italian territory,
Yeah.
and then you went to Corsica, which was French territory. Was there a difference in those two locations?
Oh yeah, in the Italians we didn't fool much with them. We had a houseboy who stole some of my gloves, but we didn't fool with them. They didn't fool with us. We didn't fool with them.
How about the French once you actually got to France and you're getting towards the end of the war?
Well, that may be one of the reasons if I got a recognition from the French. In Longecourt, which is the village we were in, let's put it this way, when we went to the mess halls, the kids would come with pails and stuff like that and take our garbage to go home to eat it. And it was they were starving. They were very, very thin. And so I started the thing that we would get food in our pans and take it out to the kids so they'd have some good food to eat. And so as a result, we were pretty good friends with the kids. And the last Christmas there, we were all the GIs got together and got gifts for the kids. We had a big Christmas party for the kids. And so in Longecourt, anyway, we had a good reputation with the kids. And as a result, the people.
Did Santa Claus come visit that year?
I was supposed to be Santa Claus, but because I arranged the party, but the squadron saw fit to send me on a mission, so I didn't get back from the mission until the party was well in tow.
Okay. Right up here.
Longecourt, Loungeccourt.
I wish I had that kind of memory. Okay, in the red in the back there. Okay, the questions, two-part question. One was, did you encounter any generals? And I believe towards the end of the war, you were in the Third Army, is that right?
Right. Yeah.
So that was General Patton's army.
Right.
And the second part of the question again, did you work with any engineering units?
No, I didn't. And I never seen Patton. You know, heard a lot about him. He was our boss.
What were you hearing about Patton?
A good man, fast. Said what he wanted to say. You know how we got some other people doing what they want to do, say, politics, right?
So you appreciated a guy who spoke what he was thinking.
Oh yeah, I think he was going to clean house. You know that. If you've seen that movie, Patton, you know, that was a great movie. He probably was some guy, but I never did see him. No.
Okay, right up front here. The question for you, Betty, is the
Okay.
typical work day.
Okay. Well, I worked the swing shift most of the time. And I wore, of course, coveralls and the hard hat and the steel-toed boots. So I carried a lunch bucket. Sometimes when I worked on board ship, I would be assigned to pretty much the same riveter and bucker. When we have a job, the three of us pretty much worked together. And when it was lunchtime, even if we were down like 3 decks below and there wasn't anything there except to sit on the floor, or possibly there were hatches. Once in a while I'd see a sailor his head would pop up from the deck, and we'd have our lunch there, and But when we get home, of course, it's dark. So a lot of times, one thing I do remember is that I didn't get a day off for something like 7 weeks. That happened quite often, actually. But food in a lunch bucket got really old.
What were in those lunch buckets? What was there to eat?
Oh, I always had a sandwich and a piece of fruit.
That you would make yourself?
Oh, no. I had family with me.
Oh.
I mean, I went there with my cousin and his wife. His wife did not work at the shipyard. She was a terrible cook, but that's all right.
Jerry.
I want to say something about these Rosie the Riveters. If it hadn't been for all of those women that were working in the defense industry, we would never have won the war, because they provided the munitions and everything we needed. The French and the English and Americans took her from people like her.
And there's a great reason to go to the exhibit, because part of the exhibit includes a panel where it's talking about the arsenal of democracy. And all we did there, we didn't try to get into a long explanation. The number of tanks that were built, the number of trucks that were built, the number of aircraft, the number of ships that were built. And the numbers are astounding.
It is.
And then you go next door to that and another panel, and it's how much we were sending to the Soviets and the British and the French and the other allied nations. We truly were the arsenal of democracy, and it wouldn't, like Jerry, you said it best, we couldn't have done it without the ladies. Other questions here? Yes, right up here. Yes. The question is about post-traumatic stress disorder, a term that didn't exist back then. It might have been called shell shock or something else, but if either of you gentlemen had any challenges as far as that was concerned when you came back home?
I never had anything like that. I was glad to get home. But when you live to be 94 years old, be in that war, it's something else. You've been through, it takes about 2.5 years in it. But that don't mean there's a lot of fellows out there that do have it, especially in the Pacific area. I was in the Atlantic area in Germany. It was different, I think, there. I don't know about anybody else, but
There wasn't too much in our group. The heavies were the ones that had the worst problems along that, because they had long missions, long time over enemy territory, a lot of flak, a lot of fighters, and enemy fighters, and the heavies took the brunt of that. There were a couple of ours that had to be sent home because I was a young punk. I enjoyed it.
Every person takes experiences like those differently, don't they?
Yep.
And I guess the question I would ask both of you is, did you talk to your wives about your experiences when you got back home?
no, I never talked too much myself. Didn't have a few things to talk about, but not that much. I was too busy trying to get by.
So you weren't talking to your wife about your military experiences?
No, not too much.
Jerry?
A little bit, but my wife and I went to the reunion groups, and so she got a lot of it out of the reunion groups. It was nothing that concerned me at all. So, and asked my daughter out there. I don't know whether your mother had any problems or not.
That is very typical of the people I talk to, the World War II generation, really any generation. Typically, they don't come home and talk to their loved ones much about it. And my experience is a lot of that is because, well, they wouldn't understand what we had experienced. Jerry, I do want to go back to you, though, and related to that question. You got involved in religion in a very meaningful way afterwards. Was religion a part of what helped you get through the experience?
Well, actually, I hadn't given a lot of thought to it, but I was not much of a churchman before the war, but I went to Bible studies that they had in the squadron when I was overseas, and maybe they started giving me the idea, but I was 50 years old before I was ordained, so.
Okay. Any other questions here? We're getting close to the end of the time, but I'm going to go way in the back there.
Thank you all for serving, and you wouldn't be here without you, so thank you very much.
He's just thanking you for your service.
Thank you.
A question, I think, relates to how young you are, and in your case, especially, Frank, we talked about this at dinner, how isolated you are from the rest of the world. How much did you know about what was going on in the big picture, even? Is that kind of your question? Okay.
Really, excuse me. Really, I don't remember a lot because the big picture that I had of the whole thing, it just was constantly moving on and taking care of business, and hope I could get home and get the thing over with. But I just never give it a lot of thought about it. I wanted to go home, of course, but I know we had a job to do over there, and a lot of them didn't make it over there. So I've made it here, and what woke me up was the last time we had the movies here about invasion, several 100,000 troops in invasion,
And
hit that
D-Day?
beachhead, went in there. Well, they had good training and couldn't show it. They dropped them 3,000, I guess it was dead. That woke me up because I thought, well, I was over there after that, just got over there after that happened. I got in there, but I was there was 3 camps there, Lucky Strike, Philip Morris, and 20 Grand. And our 89th Infantry Division was in charge of them. So I got to know a little bit about the big picture.
But that sounds like after the war.
Yeah, although I was there too at the beginning, and then we shipped out of there.
Okay.
And moved into...
Oh, those were they're near Le Havre?
Yeah, I was stationed in Le Havre and Rouen,
Okay.
France.
Which was the port of debarkation where you got off.
Yeah.
Now, Betty, I want to ask you that same question, but a little bit of a twist here. Were you and the other people who were working at the shipyard paying attention to the war news?
Oh, yeah.
How?
Well, mostly newspaper, and I kept a few of the newspapers too from the local community, and the shipyard actually put out a newspaper of their own, a kind of a, what do you call that? Anyway, it's not a regular flat newspaper, it's more like a insert or something that you see today, but we got one pretty often, and we saw pictures of the ships that were damaged and the ships that were coming in. For instance, the Bunker Hill came in with the big hole in the deck, the flight deck. Actually, it went all the way through the hangar deck, too.
I think the Bunker Hill got hit by a kamikaze at Okinawa, if I remember correctly.
So we
Jerry,
saw
your
it.
world is a little bit different. Were you able to follow the war news?
Yes, 2 sources. One, there was a Yank magazine at that time, and toward the end of the war, and that gave us a lot of information. But in bombers, you had great intelligence as to the movement of the German troops and where they were going and stuff. So we had a little larger picture than he did, but not a lot.
Yeah, an infantryman world is pretty much the 12 guys in your squad, or however many you might have had. How about rumors? Did you hear a lot of rumors?
Oh, you always hear some rumors, you know. We were supposed to be ready to go toward Japan until they settled the war, you know, ready to go over there. So it went pretty fast. But rumors, you always hear rumors, but not believing too many of them.
But rumors takes the place of the news you're not getting.
That's right.
Yeah, okay. I better get this question right down here, I think. Question is about you and your brother and conversations the two of you might have had before you got to the action and then afterwards as well.
Not too much. My brother was in the Marine Corps. He's a year and a half younger than I, and we never did talk too much about it. My sister was in the WACs, and my other brother was in the Air Force. And my dad was a World War I veteran that blew taps how I got interested in going back, quitting school and going in the service. Because I come, from home from school. He belonged to the Drum and Bugle Corps and the VFW and them kind of things. He died on turning out with the Drum and Bugle Corps, 53 years old. And that was a veteran there that was real strict GI. What do I mean by he was gung-ho? He was a real good dad, boy. He died when he was 53. So, you see that things like that happen. But the brothers part, we don't discuss too much about it. Al was in the Marine Corps in the other area, and he had a pretty good deal. I guess he drove a Jeep with officers and stuff like that. So he went in right after I went in. Mm-hmm.
Okay, a couple more questions here. Okay, the question is, how much did you know about the German concentration camps and the treatment of the Jews? And I'll start with you first, Frank.
Well, when we got further into Germany, when the war was really ending, I went through a real small concentration camp where they had bodies stacked up, and we was going through pretty fast. And I think there's some competition of who seen what was going on there. We didn't have time to stop all of that.
Did you have any sense that you're going to see that before that time?
No.
That was a surprise to you.
That's right. That many people, yeah.
How about you, Jerry?
Yeah, I got a good story. My brother was with Patton. He was in the field artillery, and they were on their way north to the Bulge, and they freed up a Holocaust camp, Ohrdruf, and the pictures my brother took were horrendous, and I have a bunch of them in my book that his daughter sent to me. That was one of the things my brother, he didn't mind talking about World War II, but he never once talked about Ohrdruf until many years later when I got the pictures. It was horrible.
Yeah, Ohrdruf was the first camp that the Allies got to, the first concentration camp. It was a satellite camp for Buchenwald. And one of the videos that we have featured here is talking about Harold Steele, who was an infantry platoon leader, I think in the 89th Division.
Mm-hmm.
And according to him, his platoon was the first to get there.
Yeah.
Now, there's several other units that claimed the same thing, but Ohrdruf, as you're talking about,
Yeah, I didn't realize that.
Ohrdruf was the place that right after that, all of the brass went there. Eisenhower
That's
went
right.
there, Bradley went there, Patton went there. You hear stories about Patton being so disgusted that he threw up. That's happened at Ohrdruf.
I have one of my pictures is my brother, Eisenhower, and Patton. Now, maybe some of the others were there, but those are the three I was able to identify in my brother's picture.
And just to put the end of that story is after Eisenhower saw that, and anybody else, you guys saw that, well, holy, this is what the war is really about. Eisenhower insisted that the German people had to come see that American congressmen had to come over and see that newspapermen had to come over and see that film crews had to come in and document it, because he was afraid that somewhere down the road, decades later, people would start denying that ever had happened.
They still are. They still are.
So there was one last question way up here. Betty, well, the question is, once the war is over, suddenly we don't need as many people working at the shipyards, and the men are coming back and they're expecting to take those jobs back. So what happened to you?
I was fired probably the next day. My cousin, the welder, he worked there another year. But I got laid off on VJ Day or the week right after. But I got another job. I got a paycheck 1 week later from the telephone company.
And how much after that did you get married?
Well, I didn't get home until October of 46. In February of 47, I got married to an ex-sailor.
Jerry, you want to jump in on this question too?
I started dating Sherry's mother when she was 14, and I was 17. She never dated another boy in her life. After I met her, I never dated another girl. A year after I got back, we were married.
That was a good one. I like that.
Well, Frank, we ought to finish with your story on that respect then. How long after the war did you end up getting married?
Not too long. My wife, she was running, was my sister's best girlfriend. And then I was headed for California. I wasn't going to stay around here. And that put the damper on me. So here, I'm still here.
It is. And again, that was very typical of your generation. You get done with the war, you've saved the world for democracy, you came back home and says, well, then let's get on with life, right?
That's right.
And us baby boomers are a result of it, quite frankly. Well, this has been a wonderful experience. You all have asked great questions. I'm sitting here thinking, why didn't I ask him that question? But let's give a good round of applause to our students. Stay seated. Just a couple other quick announcements here. This is the Fighting Powells. Do I have some Powell family members here? Let's hear you if you're here. There they are, right down here. Seven circles around 7 of the brothers out of the 11 brothers that ended up serving in World War II. There is a service flag over here in the Treasures Gallery right now. You can check that out. The Army, in its infinite wisdom, said, well, we're not going to have any families with 7 or 8 people in them, so we only are going to make a 6-star flag. So the family decided, well, we got to fix that problem, and I think, Tom, your mother took a star off of one of the other flags and sewed it on here. So there you can see the 7-star flag and the 2 pins that go along with that. So thank you very much, all of you, for being here.
Nothing will be finer than to have your ham and eggs in Carolina.